Hello and welcome. This is the Fit for Privacy Podcast, the podcast for professionals. I'm your host Punit Bhatia. In this podcast, we talk to influencers so that you get to listen and learn from their experiences and thoughts. Remember, this is not legal advice, and if you need one, please contact a professional with your situation. So let's get started. Hello and welcome. Today in the Fit for Privacy podcast, we have a very special guest, and I really mean it. She's world's leading privacy expert. She has unprecedented 3 terms as Information and Privacy Commissioner of Ontario, Canada. She is the one who created privacy by design, which we know as one of the key requirements in Gdpr these days. She's a senior fellow at Ryerson University, a faculty fellow at Arizona State University, and she is blessed with many awards, and one of them being a Lifetime Achievement Award. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Ann Cavoukian, CEO and founder of Global Privacy and Security by Design. Welcome, Ann.
My pleasure. Thank you, Punit.
So, you have such a great portfolio, and if I may ask you, how would you describe your story about privacy? How did you come about into privacy?
You know, life is so interesting. I'll give you a little personal story if you don't mind.
Sure.
I'm Armenian. That's my background. And my grandfather, who was amazing, my grandparents were in the prison during the Armenian genocide. They were supposed to be killed the next morning.
Mm-hmm.
And grandfather is thinking, what can I do to save my family? He had 3 children, and
Mm-hmm.
one of them was my father, who was 3 years old at the time. And this is my grandmother telling me the story. And my grandfather was an amazing artist, beautiful painter. And he's saying, what can I do to save my family? So my grandma said that during the dead of that night, he always had parchment paper with him and charcoal. So she lit a candle, and from memory, he etched an image, a portrait of the General Pasha, who he'd seen earlier in the day, thinking God knows what, but he thought, well, I'll just give this to him. I'll do whatever I can. So he etched a portrait. In the morning, as they were being let off to be killed, he rolled it up and gave it to the guard, the soldier, and said, please give this to General Pasha with my regards. And the guard says, stupid man, what's he going to want to do with this? Forget it. So my grandfather, that was it. It was over. Just minutes before they're about to be killed, General Pasha comes racing in on horseback, and he's waving the parchment paper. And he said, who did this? I want to know who did this. And my grandfather says, FND, that's sir in Turkish, I did it. And I like it very much. You and your family, you're free to go.
Wow.
This was amazing. I wouldn't be here today otherwise. And there are 2 reasons why I'm telling you the story. One reason is whenever people think there's no way we're going to be able to save privacy,
Right.
you know, that failed, the odds are against it, I would say, you never give up. You never give up. You never focus on what can happen. You focus on the possibility of what can happen. That's what my grandfather did, or I wouldn't be here today. But the other thing, the stories they told me, my grandmother told me when they were in the prison, if they were always looking over their shoulder and whispering to each other, because if they dared utter anything that was perceived to be pro-Armenian, you were killed right then and there. So that taught me the vital importance of privacy, not only to, in this case, one's life, but our privacy forms the foundation of our freedom. And freedom is essential. So that's why I tell you the story. That's what got me going in this privacy field.
Wow. I mean, that's a very touching story.
Thank you.
It's unbelievable, really. But then how would you describe the essence of privacy laws? Because privacy laws, as some people say, they are complex, they are difficult to interpret. But what is the essence of a privacy law, maybe in one word or few words?
The essence of a privacy law is to offer a remedy once your privacy has been breached. There's a data breach or a privacy infraction. You go to the privacy commissioner and they investigate, and then if they've broken the law of the organization, it gives you a remedy. The commissioner will say, you have to fix this, you have to do this or that. And that's very valuable. But you see, for me, that was too little too late. It was always after the fact, after the privacy harm had
Yeah.
arisen, the remedy offered. You need that still. But that's what led me to create Privacy by Design, because I wanted to create something that prevented
Mm-hmm.
infractions and data breaches. I wanted like a model, a medical model of prevention where you prevent the harms from arising. See, my background, believe it or not, I'm a psychologist. I'm not a lawyer. I
Mm-hmm.
studied psychology and the law when I was in graduate school, but my background is essentially one as a psychologist where I want to prevent bad things from happening.
Right.
And so I worked with the lawyers in my office when I was privacy commissioner to ensure that it wasn't just after the fact the remedy offered by the privacy laws. That's why I created Privacy by Design. I wanted something proactive to prevent the privacy harms from arising.
Wow. So that's rather than a remedial approach, you want to take a proactive, preventive approach. That's
Exactly.
very interesting. We will talk about privacy by design in depth, but
Of
it
course.
seems like you are in love with privacy. You really passionate about privacy. You are one of the most passionate person about privacy I've seen.
Because it's all about freedom, Puneet. To me, freedom means everything. I mean, when I think of my grandparents and then what my parents gave up, I was born in Egypt, in Cairo. I'm Armenian, but I was born in Egypt, where my mother told me when Egypt was under British rule, they had a lot of freedom. They could do whatever they wanted. They had the Armenian church, which
Yeah.
was equal to the other institutions, and there was no problem. But then mid 50s, late 50s, the British pulled out and Abdel Nasser moved in and everything changed. Freedom,
Mm-hmm.
my mom went out the door. My father was an amazing portrait photographer. He was appointed as the official photographer for Nasser, and he had no freedom. He couldn't do anything. He had to do whatever was asked of him. And the banks were nationalized. You couldn't take your money out. There was nothing. So they literally gave up everything. And in the dead of the night, as my mother said, with 8 suitcases, 2 mothers, my 2 grandmothers, and 3 children, we came to Canada with nothing. They couldn't take their money out of the bank. Nothing.
Oh.
But they gave up everything, a charmed life, so we could be raised in freedom, their children. So to me, freedom is everything. You have to be able to go about and do what you wish. And privacy forms the foundation of our freedom.
And how do you see privacy founding being the foundation for the freedom of people? Can you
Because
elaborate a bit?
yes, of course, privacy is all about personal control over the use and disclosure of your personal information. So if you have great ideas, brilliant things, but you want to keep them to yourself, of course you should be able to do that. Or if you choose to disclose everything and give it all away, that's your right as well, as long as you make the decision to do that. I always say privacy is not a religion. If you want to give away your information, be my guest, as long as you make the decision to do that. And that's why, the brilliant minds, I think of Steve Jobs often, of Apple, who is so brilliant. He
Right.
valued privacy enormously. He used to get, just a little story, he used to buy a new white Mercedes every 6 months, less a day. He would take the old one in and get another one, exactly the same make and model, for 6 months, less a day. And he kept doing this. Why? Because in California at that time, you had 6 months to get a license plate on a new car. He
Oh,
didn't want
wow.
he didn't want to be tracked. So he kept doing this. It's just freedom in terms of not being surveilled, not being tracked, you deciding how to live your life.
Interesting. And what then triggered privacy by design? Because it was long, long before GDPR or any of the laws was there, and you conceptualized this privacy by design. So how did it come along?
Literally, I remember I was privacy commissioner at the time. It was, I think, my first term or second term. And I literally created Privacy by Design at my kitchen table over 3
Wow.
nights, the 7 foundational principles of privacy. Because as I became commissioner, and I enjoyed it enormously, but I kept noticing there was nothing that urged people to prevent the harms from arising and
Right.
gave them direction into how do you prevent the harms from arising. Like take privacy as the default, which is the second of the 7 foundational principles of Privacy by Design. That says it all. What it says is people shouldn't have to ask for privacy. You shouldn't have to go to through the terms of service or all the legalese in the privacy policy to find the opt-out box. that says, do not use my information for any other purpose other than the intended primary purpose of the data collection. Nobody wants to do that. Nobody has the time to do that. But people value privacy enormously. So privacy as the default flips that literally on its head and says to the individual, you don't have to worry about privacy. You don't have to ask for it. We give it to you automatically. It's the default setting. We are only permitted to use your information for the primary purpose that you gave it to us for, not for anything else. And if any secondary uses arise later on, we'll come back to you and seek your positive consent to use the information for another use. Companies that do privacy by design have told me that it builds trust like no other, because there's such a trust deficit right now.
Right.
And privacy by design, and as the default, builds trusted business relationships enormously.
Yeah. And have there been some study or some research done on this linkage of trust to privacy by design or privacy by default?
You know, the research, I'm sure there is. In my work, people contact me directly. So it's more of a self-report. And so many companies, because we now offer privacy by design certification, a lot of companies want to be certified that they're doing privacy by design. And after they've been certified, they come back to me, and that's where they report how it has increased trust dramatically with their customer. And customers see the lengths they're going to protect their privacy. I always tell companies who do privacy by design, don't keep quiet about it. Shout it from the rooftops. Put it on your website. Tell people the lengths you're going to protect their privacy and the respect you have for their privacy.
Absolutely. I think if implemented well, it can be a differentiator, and you need to use it as a brand differentiation.
Yes.
So how do companies make privacy by design or privacy by default actionable? Because some of the challenges companies find is it seems like a concept which cannot be abstracted or which cannot be made actionable. And then they perceive that this is more of a technology side of thing, while it's a business process, product, everything, all. So what would you describe in terms of making it actionable?
It is eminently actionable, and it relates to the first time you collect personal information from your customers. So let's take one case. You're collecting information from John Doe, and it's for a particular purpose that John has consented to. You have that data, you use it for the intended purpose, all good. Theoretically, that should be the end of the story, unless you have additional consent to use that information for other purposes. You shouldn't be. The reality is, once information is in a company, often it is used within the company and it goes to different departments, different purposes. So the first thing I tell companies is, do you have a data map? Nobody has a data. And I say, that's what you need to form, a data map, so you can navigate all of the different places. You can track where personal information collected for one purpose, if it's going to additional departments and uses for secondary uses that were never intended. So once you have a data map, you can navigate the flow of the information, and you can determine if you need additional consent for secondary usage. It's eminently doable, privacy by design. It all relates to the collection and use of personal information in a way that is transparent and has been consented to by data subjects.
Interesting. So that's for companies who are starting new systems, new products, new processes. But there are a lot of companies who have systems which are, we call legacy systems. So systems coming from 70s and 80s or even 90s, and they have grown over time. They were not meant to be, meant for deletion, meant for these the new things we expect in the privacy laws. So how would you recommend or advise them to tackle privacy by design or privacy by default?
And it's more challenging, there's no question. But I always say to them, pick one or two areas that are extremely important to your business interests and to your customers. And start with even one area and take a look at your information practices relating to the collection and use of personal information from your customers. Have you obtained their positive consent when you obtain the information? And probably you have for the first use of the information. But then you need to see what additional uses of that information are being made within your organization in ways that had never been consented to. And even if you can just in that one area try to either restrict the use of the information to the primary purpose or go back to the customers and say, we would appreciate using your information for these additional purposes. We believe they would benefit you in this way. May we obtain your additional consent? So you can start small, but over time, legacy systems have to morph anyway into current day practices. So you might as well start by trying to gain a consented model from your customers, and they will appreciate that enormously.
So manage it in layers, take it step by step, identify use cases, and use case by case, manage privacy by design rather than trying to tackle the full legacy landscape.
Beautifully put, Puneet. That's perfect.
Thank you so much. And then if we look at completely shifting the perspective, nowadays we are talking about artificial intelligence.
Yes.
And in that context, people say our privacy is gone. There
Yeah.
cannot be any trust. I know you
Yeah.
talked about privacy is trust, and then they say it's not ethical. So how do you make sense of a world which is moving to digital, and not only digital, artificial intelligence, robotics, and all that? Everything will be tracked, monitored. So how does this fit in with this privacy by design concept?
So I actually created something called AI ethics by design, an extension of privacy by design into the area of AI, where you can incorporate ethical principles in terms of your treatment of the data. So with artificial intelligence, you're dealing with so many different areas, and in a way that just appears to be unwielding. Like there's no way we can control this. Yes, you can. If you start at the initial framework,
Yeah.
what do you do with AI? You usually access existing resources that are extensive and try to shape them with algorithms in a particular direction. But again,
Right.
transparency and accountability is critical. You don't just use AI and say, we're going to do whatever we want with the data. The same principles relating to informed consent, some permissibility on the part of data subjects who want to take part in this or want to have their data activated by AI, have to be respected. So when I created the AI ethics by design, it was all intended for the often the brilliant tech guys who know nothing about privacy, and they're developing the code and the algorithms for the AI. And I say to them, put the brakes on that first. Get a sense of where the information is coming from, if it has been consented to, if you are permitted to reformulate it in this manner, and build ethics into right up front so it doesn't come back to bite you after the fact. I'm not suggesting it's an easy process.
No,
It
it's
has
not.
a complexity to it, but you can do it. So please, I urge people to take a look at my AI ethics by design.
So you also have AI ethics by design, privacy by design. What else you have by design as a concept?
Okay. My last one, and this one I've just created now, is called trust by design.
Wow.
Because such a trust deficit, people are extremely interested in building trust. Organizations are clamoring for it. And there's the highest level of concern for privacy is now. I've been in this business well over 20 years. I've never seen privacy concern at the 90 percentile. 90% of those surveyed very concerned about their privacy. 92% concerned about loss of control over their data. So I created this trust by design framework, and I'm offering a course on it online in the coming, because there's such a demand for it. How do you build trust? And a lot of it deals with transparency and accountability and respect for the data subjects, that this isn't your information, it's their information. You
Right.
may have to be in control over their information, but it doesn't belong to you. You have to involve the customer. And what I've also been told, when you involve the customers, for example, in terms of letting them gain access to their data, companies have told me that has helped them enormously. Why? Because the quality of the data, the accuracy of the data, the company's not going to know anything about that. It's the individual to whom the data relate. And they say,
Right.
oh, we get contacted by data subjects, and they say, you got it all wrong. That's not my information. You've made a mistake. Here's the accurate information. So this helps companies enormously in terms of gaining accuracy, and enhances the quality of their data as well.
Absolutely. I think if we do it in the logical sequence, the way you explain it, it's similar to the data mapping, knowing what data is flowing where and how, and
Yes.
keeping track of if it's breaching the principles of privacy by design, and if it's being ethical, then it's possible. But if you look at it, the holistic thing, then it's yes, it is very, very, very complex.
Well put, Panir. Absolutely.
So, moving on to the other side of it, you have written two books, and one of them is The Privacy Payoff: How Successful Businesses Can Build Customer Trust. So, if you can, tell us something about this book. What do you talk about in building trust for businesses?
Again, we were so interested in ensuring that businesses understood there was a clear benefit to them in respecting the privacy of their customers, and that building trust into the entire framework gives you a competitive advantage. You as a business win, not only the customer, but it's mutual. It's a win-win. And I always remind businesses of that you have to have an understanding of the mutual benefits. Get rid of the zero-sum framework of, either or, win lose. That is so dated, so yesterday, and it's predicated on when you have a positive gain in one area, a business, you have a loss at the other area, privacy, and the two totals to a sum of zero. It's nonsense. That's so dated. I want you to have multiple positive gains at the same time. That's called positive sum. And that's what I ensure, that businesses understand that they can gain enormously by respecting their customers' privacy, who will then respect their business operations and will give them their loyalty and their repeat business. It will also attract new opportunity. Clients, customers talk all the time to their friends and family, and it will attract more customers to your operations. So make it a win-win.
So is it something like your motto in the organization wherein you say, dispel the myth that we must choose between privacy, public safety, and business interests? So essentially, there's a feeling, perception around people that if I need personalization, I must give in privacy. And if I give in privacy, I won't have personalization. And then it becomes either or. And while you're saying we want to have both, is that the essence?
That's exactly it, Punit. You have to have both. That's what I refer to as multiple positive gains. And this all comes from something called game theory, which was created years ago.
Yeah.
And the prevailing model has been zero sum, which is most unfortunate because, as you described, that's the win-lose. And it's so yesterday. The thing is, it's easier to do that than take the time to think it through so that you can have multiple positive gains, make it a win-win. But the return is far greater if you make it a win-win. And so every company I talk to them this way, and I describe how they can have multiple gains and how having the trust of their customers will give them multiple gains, repeat business, attract new opportunity, and you will retain their loyalty, which you need. And in this day, that's fleeting. So those are all the things that you can do to help your business.
Well, I can imagine that comes from a psychologist, because most of the universe guys or the balance guys, they talk about you can either have this or that and you need to balance everything. So it's essentially that universal concept of balancing out your life and saying it's not family or profession, it's not spiritual or this. You need to balance your life in all aspects. So you're bringing that to privacy. It's very fascinating to see that.
When I was in graduate school at the University of Toronto, Professor Rappaport, Anatole Rappaport, the father of game theory, he was there, and I was just a graduate student fawning over his work. But I was always attracted to positive sum, multiple positive gains. And I used to say to him, Professor Rappaport, why does everyone embrace zero sum, either or? I don't understand, win lose. And he said, Ann, it's simple. That's the lazy man's way out. It's easier to do zero sum, but the long term are non-existent.
Very interesting. It's the easy way for lazy men.
Yes. Lazy man way out. We don't want that.
Oh, wow. And now we are living in this COVID world or pandemic world.
Yes.
And there's again that fear of the same thing which we are talking about. It's either my health or my privacy. Either I'm traced or I'm not. And again, people are not looking at it as something which can be both. You can do it anonymously, but inform people and not keep that data. So what's your view around privacy and its relevance in world of COVID when we are talking about exposures to notifications, traceability, and you've heard or seen the models in China which are very or seem to be very invasive.
Oh, I mean, China is, there's no privacy there. There's no freedom. They live on a social credit system where all your activities are tracked and traced. And it's the last thing we want. Of course, COVID-19 is serious. And people understandably are now trying to create contact tracing apps, which will allow individuals to be alerted to the fact that they've been exposed to someone who is COVID-19 positive. But we can do this in a way that protects privacy and gives you the information you need to protect your health. And that's what I have this discussion all the time with public health authorities. You cannot give up privacy in favor of public health. COVID-19 is going to end. There's no question. But we cannot have privacy and our freedom end at the same time. And wonderful, two open letters were written, one by 300 academics and epidemiologists from all around the world from 26 countries, saying that we simply cannot forego privacy. If we do, these public health measures, they're going to fail. We must preserve privacy in the whole process. And last week, a second letter by 170 academics from the UK objecting to what the UK was doing in terms of their invasive way of tracking. Now, we have an alternative. Apple has partnered with Google, believe it or not, and they have created the most privacy protective contact tracing system possible. In fact, they don't call it contact tracing because it's not about tracing your activities.
Right.
They call it exposure notification. What it does is it's totally privacy protective. Apple has briefed me on 2 occasions behind the scenes to make sure, because I always say you got to look under the hood and make sure they collect no personal identifiers, no identity whatsoever. Your geolocation data is not collected. Bluetooth beacons are used, which change every 15 minutes, and even that is encrypted. There's no concern for privacy. And what it does, if you choose to download the app, it will alert you if you've been exposed to someone who has self-reported as being COVID-19 positive. So it will make you aware of, notify you of being exposed to people. And the thing is, if we don't have the trust of individuals, no one's going to use any of these apps. And that's why the Apple Google app is very privacy protective and will build trust. And that's why I'm supporting it so strongly, because as an independent person who tends to be respected for privacy, they are going to believe that I'm saying this is unbelievably privacy protective. And I'm concerned about other ones. In fact, what they were using in the UK, they're now thinking of changing to the Apple Google framework because it was privacy invasive. So I think you're going to see a lot of back and forth on this. I'm hoping the public health authorities will be attracted to the Apple Google framework. There's no cost to using it, and Apple has said they will offer their assistance to people who want to use it, and it's amazing. So I'm urging people to take a look at it seriously and preserve privacy and help in terms of public health. You can do both.
I think that's very important. As you started, you said it's a choice of people if they choose to download, and that's something very important. And I was reading, I think today or yesterday, about the app they have created in India, the government, and they are saying you have to download, you have to have this if you're going to fly, if you're going to get air tickets and so on. And that's not the way. You cannot mandate things.
No, and the way India is doing it, and China and others, when you have that mandate, once the COVID-19 crisis ends, and it will, they will still have that information.
Right.
They will not be deleting it. They will be in control of very sensitive health information. And in the privacy world, your personal health information, medical data, is the most sensitive information in existence, and it deserves the strongest protection. So what I'm saying to organizations, in Canada, Europe, abroad, if your government is collecting additional personal information because of COVID-19 under emergency powers, make sure there's a sunset clause, a firm date by which they have to stop doing that, and then they have to delete all the information that's collected. This is absolutely essential. These measures have to be responsible, proportionate, and have accountability through these sunset clauses.
I think, yeah, these are the right words. Some of the measures are not proportionate. They are being, how should I say, a little bit panic reactions,
Yeah,
knee-jerk reactions saying, let's do this and we will figure that out later. You need to factor in right now. When will you delete? What do you need? And how much do you need? You don't
e-
need all the things.
exactly. And once the pandemic is over, you don't need any of it. You must get rid of it. Otherwise, this will just lead to increased tracking and surveillance.
Right, and then there are also challenges which they are discussing about in Europe. You can have the app in complementary to what you have otherwise, because some people may not have, some people may not choose to use it, and then you need to have complementary mechanisms giving you information, because that's the objective. You just cannot rely on one means or one app.
Totally agree. And we have to insist upon this all around the world. It's very, very important.
Absolutely. Okay, moving away from COVID, because I mean, I know we can talk about it for the whole day, and probably you spend a lot of time during the day on this these days. You were part of this smart cities project before, and then you quit. So, okay, there are two parts which I like you to help us understand. One, what does smart cities have to do with privacy or privacy by design? And then, what happened that you quit? If you like to share, of course, if you choose to share.
You know, Sidewalk Labs approached me at the beginning of the Smart City project that they were bidding on in Toronto, Canada, which is where I live. And
Mhm.
they said, we'd like to hire you to embed privacy by design into the smart city we're creating. And I said, that's great. I would love that. It's very important to protect privacy in a smart city. And I said, but let me just tell you, I'll be a thorn in your side if you don't offer the strongest privacy possible. And they said, that's why we're hiring you. I said, great. So they went along with it at the beginning, and I studied it and I said, look, here's what we have to do. In a smart city, the technologies, the sensors, they're on 24/7. There's
Mhm.
no opportunity for individuals to consent or revoke consent to the collection of their personal information. I said, because of that, we have to de-identify data at source, meaning all data that's collected by the sensors, etc. The
Mhm.
minute it's collected, you scrub it of any personal identifiers, you anonymize the data, then you can use the data for whatever purpose you want without any privacy risks. And
Right.
at the beginning, Sidewalk Labs went along with that, but later they didn't. That's what this. I won't get into all the details of
Yeah, but
why,
I understand.
but when they reversed course, and I was at a board meeting, and I was at the board meeting, and they said, we're going to form a trust where other organizations, in addition to ourselves and the government and Waterfront Toronto, other companies, IT companies, we can all be part of this trust and we can all decide on things together. And they said, but of course, we can't make the IT companies and others de-identify data at source. We can't do that. So it'll be up to them. And I knew the minute they said that wasn't going to happen. No one is going to do this voluntarily. So that's why they didn't consult with me. So the next morning, I handed in my resignation, and
Oh.
they couldn't believe I would leave such a lucrative contract just because. And I said, no, I told you I'd be a thorn in your side. You're not doing privacy by design anymore. I'm out of there. And you see, that's why it's critical in a smart city to have privacy embedded right at the beginning on all the technologies that are going to be
Mhm.
collecting so much personal information. The whole point of a smart city is not to collect personal information, is
No,
to facilitate activities and do things at a different level, but not in violation of privacy. And that's why I had to leave.
I think you need a lot of courage and passion, courage to quit and passion for privacy to do so. But
Thank you.
I think in your position, you are probably in position to do so.
Well, the good news was an hour after I quit, the board of Waterfront Toronto, who's the governing body for the smart city, called me and they said, come work with us. We believe in de-identifying data at source and offering the strongest privacy possible.
Mhm.
So eventually it leads to a win.
Oh, wow. So it's a win-win in the end. You
Yes.
managed
Oh,
to achieve what you wanted, or the
thank
way
you.
it should be done, more importantly. Okay, and you have also written a book called Who Knows Safeguarding Your Privacy in a Networked World. It kind of links to our earlier idea that we are becoming a digital identity which is floating around. We are no longer people at a place, we are digital moving across the world at any moment in the cloud. So, I believe its book is about that. I have to still read it. But tell us something about this to all our listeners.
It's a book I wrote with John Tapscott, and we wrote it because we wanted, it was early days when technology was just beginning and developing. And we wanted people to know that you can have privacy in a networked world, but you have to ask the question, who knows who's doing what with our personal information? You have to get at the heart of who's collecting our information, how are they doing it, and how can we embed privacy in a networked world? And so these are the kinds of questions we raised, and it was amazing. It really took off and became a bestseller. There was just a lot of interest in finding out how we can do this.
Wow. So you've been so long in the industry. I don't think there's anyone else who's been that long or that influential, at least. So, what would be your one key thing that you learned about privacy and you believe most people, especially the new ones or younger ones, miss out?
Transparency and control. So transparency is essential for people to know what information is being collected about them by companies and governments. And let me be clear, governments are no better than companies. In fact, maybe they're worse because they want to be in control of information.
Right.
So transparency to individuals' data subjects about what information is being collected. And then control, personal control on the part of the data subject, the individual, to be able to retain control over their personal information. They can choose to consent to whatever they want, of course. I don't care how you exercise control. I just want you to be in a position where you have control, and you should demand control from organizations and governments you're dealing with. Speak up if you think there's a problem, especially governments. They're supposed to be protecting your privacy. Speak up loudly. And we have privacy commissioners all around the world. If you think there's a problem and your information is being abused, file a complaint right away. Have them investigate.
So that's the advice for individuals who are giving data, who are owners of data and giving the custodianship to organizations. But what about people who are in charge of protecting in companies? I'm talking about the data protection officers. What would you recommend them to do in terms of making sure data remains protected?
I'm not saying this is easy to do, but I would urge data protection officers to get the attention of their CEOs, their boards of directors. If
Right.
you can the board and the CEO to understand the importance of privacy and how you can gain a competitive advantage by doing it strongly, then the data protection officer will have a lot more authority and a lot more ability to say, look, privacy is critical to our business. We can't let it slide. Here are all the measures we have to introduce to strongly protect our privacy and security of the data. So I always urge people to try to get the attention of your senior executives, because if you're low in the spectrum and no one is listening to what you're saying, you're not going to have much effect. You have to speak up, get their attention, and then make a compelling case as to why it's in the business's best interest to strongly protect data and privacy of customers.
Right. So earlier on, we said ownership should be taken up by individuals, and if they doubt something, they should go to the authorities. The DPOs should go to the CEOs. And what should the CEOs do then? What should the executive management do from your advice?
I talk to a lot of boards and CEOs, and I urge them to have a direct relationship with the data protection officers of the
Right.
privacy. That having that relationship is very important, because anytime the CEO or the board is contemplating a new collection practice or a new venture that they're engaging in, right at the beginning, before you engage in it, then call the DPO and the privacy officer and make sure you run it by them. So we're going to do this new venture and we have to have this much information. So then have the DPO help you shape how to collect that information, how to do it in the most privacy protective way to ensure that you get the positive consent of the data subjects, the customers, and transparency and accountability. When you do that from the outset, it's so much easier than
Absolutely.
having the problems arise and having to clean up after the fact.
So essentially, the advice to CEOs is don't wait till the product is conceptualized, sales and marketing are on board. Do it at the ideation stage, align with your DPO, discuss, consult, brainstorm, and find out ideas on how do you do it in a trust and ethic and privacy compliant way.
Exactly. I tell companies, get rid of the silos. Don't have, legal departments there and privacy's here and marketing's over there. Get rid of the silos. Everybody's got to talk to each other up front at the beginning, initial stages of new ventures, so that everyone can benefit from each other's knowledge and input, including the data protection officer, the privacy officer. It's very critical to have everyone engaged early on.
Absolutely. And I think that's a big challenge in the large or multinational corporations, because they tend to get into silos rather than having a seamless flow of information and skill sets. Okay. So that was wonderful having you. And, everything is time bound. So we have to say it ends. While I would love to see your passion and continue forever. But what would be your one final message for our audiences?
Make sure you talk to your children, to your family, to your friends, to have everyone grasp the value of privacy. That it's not about, drives me crazy. People say, well, if you've got nothing to hide, you got nothing to, what's the problem? I always say that could have been the motto of the Stasi police, that said, well, the state should have everything about you because you have nothing to hide. That's nonsense. We are allowed free areas where we're allowed to ponder, to think, to do whatever we wish. That's what privacy is all about, areas of personal control. So I tell people, the value of privacy cannot be underestimated. It breeds creativity and innovation, the crazy, wild ideas, the blue sky thinking. Mm-hmm. Privacy is critical also to our freedom, as I've said repeatedly. So give an understanding of the importance of privacy to your family, to your children, to your friends, and cherish what it brings to your life. I also want to dispel a myth. People say, well, kids don't care about privacy anymore, children. That's nonsense. Right. That's absolute nonsense. Dana Boyd at New York University has done extensive research on how children, especially really younger children now, value privacy enormously. And they know, they're tech savvy. They know how to protect their privacy. They know how to keep their parents out of their Facebook and other things, for example. So ensure that everyone has a clear understanding of the value of privacy and exercise your choice to do what you want and control your information. It's up to you.
You already addressed the follow-up question I was building up, like, what about children and how do you tell teenagers to respect privacy? But very well said.
Thank you.
So from your profile and from this interview, if somebody thinks that they want to get in touch with you or know more about things like you talked about, this Trust by Design course or Privacy by Design courses and Ethics by Design or things like that, what's the best way of contacting you?
Tell them to email me. You have my email, and it's just my name, Ann Cavoukian at gpsbydesigncenter.com.
Perfect. And I also see you're very active on Twitter.
Oh, yeah. My Twitter is just at Ann Cavoukian, capital A, capital C.
Right.
And I do that because I have a large Twitter following, and I want to get the stories of the day out right away. So I tweet between 5:30 and 6 every morning. My husband is a saint. And I do that because a lot of the stories that come from Europe and Australia, abroad, I want to share what's going on in the world so people can be aware of the latest developments.
Absolutely. So ladies and gentlemen, this was Ann Cavoukian. Thanks, Ann, for being with us. It was a pleasure to see your passion, to see your energy and your drive to give up on privacy. That's one message I take from it. So thank you so much.
Of course. My pleasure, Puneet. I enjoyed this very much.
Thanks for tuning in. I hope you liked this effort. Please do click like, comment and share. It is okay if you did not like it. Please still do make a comment and share with us what we can improve. If you have suggestions, ideas for guests, or you want to have your question answered, please email me. My email is info@punitbhatia.com. You can also share this with others, and if you do so while tagging me in, I will personally thank and acknowledge your contribution in coming episodes. Thanks once more, and look forward to seeing you back. Till then, stay safe, stay blessed, and stay happy.